From a fake Soviet rocket that nearly sparked an international incident to a Paul McCartney song the director openly hated, the 1985 Cold War comedy Spies Like Us has more bizarre secrets than a classified CIA file. What if we told you the film originally ended with nuclear annihilation, that Dan Aykroyd married his co-star just before filming, or that 8 famous directors made secret cameos? Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about Spies Like Us. Fact 1. Tragic origins with John Belushi. The story behind Spies Like Us is inseparable from one of Hollywood's most heartbreaking losses. Dan Aykroyd originally conceived the script as a vehicle for himself and his close friend John Belushi, envisioning it as a modern take on the classic Bob Hope and Bing Crosby road to movies that both comedians had loved growing up. The two Saturday Night Live stars had already proven their incredible chemistry together in 1980's The Blues Brothers, which became a massive hit and cemented them as one of comedy's great duos. Aykroyd worked on the screenplay with fellow Canadian comedian Dave Thomas during the early 1980s, crafting a story specifically designed to showcase the kind of chaotic energy and improvisational brilliance that made Aykroyd and Belushi so beloved. But on March 5, 1982, John Belushi died from a drug overdose at the Chateau Marmont in Los Angeles at just 33 years old, leaving Aykroyd devastated and the Spies Like Us project in limbo. Determined to salvage the script, Aykroyd and Thomas rewrote it for Aykroyd and Richard Pryor, hoping that Pryor's manic energy might capture some of what Belushi would have brought to the role. However, the studios rejected this version, unwilling to move forward with that particular pairing. For a brief period, the project was then adapted as a potential starring vehicle for Dave Thomas himself alongside his SCTV comedy partner, Rick Moranis. But neither comedian had enough box office clout at the time to make such an ambitious international production financially viable. The script sat in development hell until Chevy Chase became available after abandoning his own spy-themed project at Warner Brothers. Chase read Aykroyd's screenplay and loved it, pushing the studio to greenlight the film with him in the role originally intended for Belushi. Aykroyd later told the Boston Globe in 1988 that Chevy helped him get Spies Like Us made, acknowledging that without Chase's involvement, his tribute to the classic comedy films he and Belushi had admired together might never have reached the screen. Fact 2. The apocalyptic ending test audiences rejected. When audiences first watched Spies Like Us in test screenings, they witnessed something completely different from the version that eventually hit theaters in December of 1985. The original ending took a dark turn that would have left moviegoers stunned and horrified rather than laughing as they left the cinema. Instead of our bumbling heroes saving the day, the film concluded with the Soviet missile successfully detonating over the United States, triggering a full-scale nuclear war that resulted in the complete destruction of the world. Director John Landis had crafted an ending inspired by Stanley Kubrick's dark satire, Dr. Strangelove, where the apocalyptic finale served as the ultimate punchline to the Cold War paranoia that had been building throughout the story. Test audiences absolutely hated this bleak conclusion, and their negative reactions were so strong that Warner Brothers knew they had a serious problem on their hands. The studio had invested $22 million in what was supposed to be a lighthearted comedy starring 2 of Saturday Night Live's biggest stars, and here they were with a film that ended with global annihilation. The disconnect between the goofy, slapstick humor of the first 2 acts and the sudden shift to nuclear holocaust was jarring enough that audiences couldn't accept it, even as black comedy. The studio ordered immediate reshoots to create a happier ending that would give viewers the satisfying conclusion they expected from a Chevy Chase and Dan Aykroyd vehicle. The replacement ending was shot quickly on a soundstage in Burbank, California, and it shows if you look closely. In the new finale, Austin Milbarge realizes the missile can be recalled and reprogrammed, and he works with the Soviet technicians to redirect it harmlessly into space, where it detonates without causing any damage. The film then jumps to a cheerful scene showing the characters playing a combination of risk and trivial pursuit with their new Soviet friends as part of nuclear disarmament negotiations. If you watch carefully during the moment when Chase and Aykroyd embrace after saving the world, you can clearly see they're standing in front of an obvious backdrop rather than on location, a telltale sign of the hasty reshoot that gave Spies Like Us its crowd-pleasing happy ending. Fact 3. Paul McCartney's terrible song. When one of the biggest rock legends in history writes a theme song for your movie, you'd think any director would be thrilled. But John Landis had other ideas. In what might be one of the most brutally honest assessments of a collaboration in Hollywood history, Landis openly admitted that he thought Paul McCartney's Spies Like Us theme song was terrible, yet he felt completely powerless to say no to both McCartney and the studio executives at Warner Brothers. The whole situation became an awkward dance of politeness, masking genuine artistic disagreement. McCartney had been approached by Warner Brothers to create the title track for the film, and given his previous success with the James Bond theme Live and Let Die, it seemed like a perfect match. The former Beatle took a break from recording his Press to Play album in September of 1985 and knocked out the song in just 1 week at his Hog Hill Mill studio. He played nearly every instrument himself, except for synthesizers handled by Eddie Rayner from Split Enz, and brought in backing vocals from his wife Linda, Eric Stewart, and others. What made Landis's predicament even more uncomfortable was that McCartney originally wanted to create a more traditional spy theme with a 75-piece orchestra and an Eastern touch, similar to his Bond work. However, Landis had specifically requested an up-tempo rock and roll song instead. So McCartney delivered exactly what the director asked for, and Landis still hated it. The song ended up being quite successful despite the director's feelings, reaching number 7 on the Billboard Hot 100 in early 1986 and becoming McCartney's last top 10 hit in America for nearly 3 decades. The most ironic twist is that Landis even directed the music video for the song, which featured Aykroyd and Chase pretending to play instruments alongside McCartney at Abbey Road Studios. It's hard to imagine standing behind the camera filming a video for a song you've publicly called terrible, but that's exactly what happened in this strange chapter of 80s movie soundtrack history. Fact 4. The BBC banned the music video. When Paul McCartney agreed to write and perform the theme song for Spies Like Us, director John Landis had the idea to create a music video featuring the film's stars, Dan Aykroyd and Chevy Chase, alongside the legendary Beatle. The video was filmed at Abbey Road Studios in London, showing McCartney performing the song while Aykroyd and Chase pretended to play instruments in the recording booth. Chase appeared to play keyboards while Aykroyd mimed the role of a producer, and the 2 actresses from the film, Donna Dixon and Vanessa Angel, played backup singers. The video also cleverly spliced in clips from the movie to make it look like the song was part of the film itself. And it ended with a playful homage to the famous Beatles album cover, showing McCartney, Chase, and Aykroyd walking across the zebra crossing outside Abbey Road. But when the British Broadcasting Corporation reviewed the video for airplay, they immediately ran into a problem with British labor laws that were in place during the mid-1980s. The regulations were designed to protect musicians' unions and stated that non-musicians could not appear in music videos performing instruments, even if it was obviously just for fun and clearly staged. Since both Dan Aykroyd and Chevy Chase were actors and not professional musicians on the actual recording, the BBC initially refused to broadcast the video on their network. This decision seemed especially absurd, considering that anyone watching could tell the 2 comedians were just goofing around and weren't seriously claiming to have played on the track. The irony was that both Aykroyd and Chase actually did have legitimate musical backgrounds, with Aykroyd being part of the Blues Brothers, which made the ban even more ridiculous. Eventually, the BBC did air an edited version of the video on Top of the Pops in early January of 1986, after the offending shots of Chase and Aykroyd with instruments were replaced with additional film clips from Spies Like Us. The full unedited version, however, remained banned from regular BBC programming, making it one of the stranger casualties of overzealous broadcasting regulations. Fact 5. Donna Dixon almost refused the role. When Donna Dixon was offered the role of Karen Boyer in Spies Like Us, she nearly turned it down, and the reason had nothing to do with the script or the character. Dixon had just married Dan Aykroyd in April of 1983 after they met on the set of Dr. Detroit, and she was extremely concerned about accepting a part in a film where her new husband was not only the star, but also one of the screenwriters. Dixon worried that people would assume she got the role simply because of her marriage to Aykroyd, rather than on her own merit as an actress, and she was determined to avoid any appearance of nepotism or special treatment. This wasn't the first time Dixon had made this kind of decision based on principle. She had previously turned down the opportunity to audition for the Sigourney Weaver role in Ghostbusters for exactly the same reason, even though that film also starred her husband and became one of the biggest hits of 1984. According to production notes, Dixon was so reluctant to audition for Spies Like Us that the filmmakers had to convince her to at least try out for the part alongside everyone else who was being considered. She eventually agreed, but only on the condition that she would go through the same audition process as any other actress, and that she would earn the role on her own abilities. The production team honored her request, and Dixon auditioned just like any other candidate for the part. She won the role of Karen Boyer, the competent and no-nonsense real CIA agent who has to deal with the bumbling antics of Chevy Chase and Dan Aykroyd's characters. Dixon went on to appear in several more films with her husband throughout the 1980s and 90s, including The Couch Trip in 1988 and Exit to Eden in 1994. The couple remained married for 39 years before separating in 2022, though they announced they would remain legally married and continue as business partners and co-parents. Fact 6. The Norwegian Cold War Scare. Imagine filming a comedy in the middle of one of the most tense geopolitical standoffs in modern history and accidentally creating what could have been a genuine international incident. That's exactly what happened when the cast and crew of Spies Like Us traveled to Norway in early 1985 to shoot scenes that were supposed to represent the frozen landscape of Soviet Russia. The production set up shop on top of a mountain near Sognefjord, one of Norway's most remote and dramatic locations, and they brought along an incredibly realistic prop that would make any military official nervous: a full-scale replica of a Soviet SS-20 intermediate-range ballistic missile mounted on an authentic-looking launcher. Dan Aykroyd later revealed the potentially dangerous situation in an interview with the Daily Telegraph, explaining that they had parked this fake Soviet rocket right there on the mountainside, where it was completely visible to anyone passing by. Keep in mind that this was 1985, right in the middle of the Cold War, when tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union were running at extremely high levels. Norway shares a border with Russia, and any Soviet military equipment on Norwegian soil would have been seen as a massive provocation or potential threat. The SS-20 missile system was a real weapon that NATO countries were deeply concerned about at the time, making the presence of even a movie prop version something that could easily be misunderstood. The film crew was essentially sitting on a snow-covered mountain with what looked exactly like enemy military hardware in a region where both sides were watching each other's every move with satellites and reconnaissance aircraft. Aykroyd acknowledged that if the wrong people had spotted their fake missile at the wrong time, it could have caused serious confusion or even triggered an alert. Fortunately, no international incidents occurred, but the fact that a Hollywood comedy production came that close to potentially rattling Cold War nerves shows just how unusual and risky some of the location choices were for this film. Fact 7. Morocco military chase and prank. Filming in Morocco during the spring of 1985 turned into a real-life spy thriller when Dan Aykroyd accidentally triggered an international incident that would have fit perfectly into the movie itself. While shooting scenes in the Sahara Desert that were meant to represent Pakistan and Afghanistan in the film, Aykroyd spotted a truck full of Moroccan paratroopers and, thinking it would make a great behind-the-scenes photo, casually snapped a picture of the military unit. What seemed like an innocent moment of tourist photography quickly became a high-speed chase that could have landed both stars in serious trouble. The paratroopers immediately took offense to being photographed and jumped into their truck to pursue Aykroyd and Chase at dangerous speeds through the Moroccan desert. The two comedians, suddenly living out their own spy movie escape sequence, raced back toward their hotel with the military vehicle in hot pursuit. When they reached the hotel, they had to think fast. They abandoned their Jeep and dove into a nearby van that happened to have curtains covering the windows, hiding inside while the angry soldiers searched for them. The paratroopers eventually gave up and left, but the incident left Chase genuinely shaken by how close they had come to being detained by foreign military forces. However, Aykroyd saw the entire ordeal as comedy gold and decided to take the prank one step further. The next morning, he convinced director John Landis to help him pull off an elaborate joke on his co-star. Landis solemnly approached Chase and told him that the Moroccan authorities had arrested Aykroyd overnight for the photography incident, and that Chase should expect them to come for him next as an accomplice. Chase apparently believed the story completely and spent several anxious hours before Aykroyd revealed the truth. Aykroyd later recounted this entire story as a guest on the Chevy Chase Show in October of 1993, laughing about how the real-life adventure rivaled anything they filmed for the movie. Fact 8. 8 director cameos. When you watch Spies Like Us, you might notice that the drive-in theater security guards and a few CIA agents seem oddly familiar, and that's because they're actually some of the most talented filmmakers in Hollywood making sneaky appearances. Director John Landis, who was well known for packing his movies with celebrity cameos, took things to an entirely different level by recruiting an unprecedented 8 famous directors to play small roles throughout the film. At the abandoned drive-in theater that serves as a secret military facility, 3 of the security guards holding rifles are actually directors Sam Raimi, Joel Cohen, and Martin Brest, all of whom would go on to make some of the biggest films of the 1980s and 90s. Raimi would later direct the Spider-Man trilogy. Cohen became half of the legendary Coen brothers duo behind films like Fargo and No Country for Old Men, and Brest directed Beverly Hills Cop and Scent of a Woman. The director cameos didn't stop there, as Monty Python's Terry Gilliam appears as Dr. Imhouse, one of the many doctors in the infamous Doctor, Doctor, Doctor scene that became one of the film's most memorable running gags. Frank Oz, best known as the voice of Yoda and Miss Piggy, shows up as the FSB test administrator about 15 minutes into the film. Michael Apted, who would later direct the James Bond film The World Is Not Enough, and B-movie legend Larry Cohen both appear as Ace Tomato Company agents, which is the CIA front organization in the movie. Alongside these directors, visual effects pioneer Ray Harryhausen, the master behind stop-motion creatures in films like Jason and the Argonauts, also makes a brief appearance as Dr. Marston. What makes this collection of cameos so unusual is that Landis managed to gather filmmakers from completely different genres and styles, from horror to comedy to serious drama, all willing to play tiny throwaway roles in a Cold War spy spoof. This wasn't just about star power, it was about Landis showing respect to his fellow directors and creating an inside joke that only the most observant film buffs would catch. Fact 9. Extreme temperature torture. Making Spies Like Us meant putting the cast and crew through what might be the most extreme weather whiplash in film history. The production schedule required them to shoot in 2 of the most hostile climates on Earth, back to back, with almost no time to adjust between locations. First came Norway, where the team spent 4 weeks filming near Sonafjord to create the snowy Soviet scenes that make up a significant portion of the movie. The conditions there were absolutely brutal, with temperatures dropping well below zero and snow accumulating to depths of 8 feet in some areas. Dan Aykroyd and Chevy Chase had to perform their comedy routines while bundled in heavy winter gear, trying to stay warm enough to deliver their lines without their teeth chattering. The crew struggled just as much, dealing with equipment that kept freezing and malfunctioning in the sub-zero temperatures. Camera operators had to work in shifts because the cold made it dangerous to stay outside for extended periods, and several crew members reportedly suffered from frostbite during the shoot. Then, without much of a break, the entire production packed up and relocated to Morocco, where they filmed the Pakistan and Afghanistan sequences in the Sahara Desert. The temperature swing was absolutely shocking. Instead of 8 feet of snow and freezing conditions, the cast and crew now faced scorching heat that regularly climbed to 130 degrees Fahrenheit. Production notes from the time describe how the desert heat cooked everyone on a daily basis, making it nearly impossible to work during the middle of the day. The extreme heat caused different problems than the cold, with actors struggling to stay hydrated and crew members dealing with equipment overheating instead of freezing. This drastic climate change happened within the span of just a few weeks, giving everyone whiplash as their bodies tried to adjust from Arctic conditions to desert extremes. The physical toll of shooting in these two opposite environments made the already challenging comedy production even more grueling for everyone involved. Fact 10. Ronald Reagan got screen credit. If you watch Spies Like Us all the way through to the end credits, you'll spot something genuinely unusual for a Hollywood comedy from 1985. Right there among the cast and crew listings, you'll find an entry that reads Ronald Reagan, followed by his official title, President of the United States. This wasn't some kind of joke or Easter egg hidden in the fine print, but an actual screen credit given to the sitting president during the height of the Cold War, appearing in a film that poked fun at the very nuclear tensions his administration was navigating at the time. The reason for Reagan's credit ties directly to one of the movie's opening scenes where Chevy Chase's character, Emmett Fitzhugh, is watching an old Ronald Reagan film from his Hollywood days. The scene shows Reagan performing in the 1952 musical She's Working Her Way Through College, where he sings I'll Still Be Loving You alongside Virginia Mayo and Gene Nelson. This footage wasn't just stock material pulled from some archive without permission. It required proper licensing and credit, which meant acknowledging Reagan not as the current commander-in-chief, but as the actor who had appeared in that earlier film. The production team followed standard Hollywood protocol and listed him in the credits, creating the remarkable situation where a sitting president received billing in a contemporary comedy release. What makes this even stranger is the context surrounding the film itself. Spies Like Us centered on Cold War espionage, nuclear brinkmanship, and the very real fears of atomic warfare that defined Reagan's presidency. Yet here was his name appearing in the credits of a movie that treated these serious geopolitical concerns as fodder for slapstick comedy. The film's producers at Warner Brothers and director John Landis apparently saw no issue with this peculiar juxtaposition, and Reagan's administration raised no objections to the president's Hollywood past being woven into a film that satirized the era's spy games and nuclear paranoia. Fact 11. Bob Hope's last big screen cameo. When Bob Hope strolled through that medical tent swinging a golf club in Spies Like Us, audiences had no idea they were witnessing the final theatrical film appearance of one of Hollywood's greatest legends. The legendary comedian, who was 82 years old at the time of filming in 1985, made a brief but memorable cameo that lasted roughly 20 seconds, walking through the scene while Chevy Chase and Dan Aykroyd's characters were surrounded by a group of supposed doctors in the middle of nowhere. The moment is quintessential Bob Hope, casual and effortlessly funny, requiring no dialogue to get the joke across as he simply strolls through with his golf club, as if this bizarre situation in the desert is just another day on the links. The cameo wasn't just a random celebrity appearance, but served as a direct tribute to the very films that inspired Spies Like Us in the first place. Director John Landis had openly stated that the movie was conceived as a modern update of the famous road to movies that Bob Hope and Bing Crosby made together, a series of 7 films starting with Road to Singapore in 1940 and ending with The Road to Hong Kong in 1962. Those films featured Hope and Crosby as bumbling adventurers traveling to exotic locations and getting into ridiculous situations, which is exactly the template that Spies Like Us followed, with Chase and Aykroyd taking on similar roles as incompetent spies stumbling through international intrigue. Having Bob Hope himself appear in the film was the ultimate seal of approval and a passing of the torch from the original comedy duo to the new generation of Saturday Night Live comedians. In the credits, Hope's name even appears with an exclamation mark added after a few seconds, a playful touch that acknowledged his legendary status. While Hope continued to appear in television specials and made-for-TV movies after Spies Like Us, this marked his final bow in a movie theater, making it a surprisingly poignant moment in comedy history hidden inside a silly Cold War farce. If you're a fan of director John Landis, you might have noticed a peculiar phrase that keeps popping up in his movies, and Spies Like Us is no exception. Hidden in plain sight during one of the training sequences is a U.S. Army recruiting poster hanging on the wall behind Colonel Rumbus that reads, "The Army can teach you a skill. See you next Wednesday." This seemingly random phrase is actually one of the most famous Easter eggs in cinema history, and it has a fascinating backstory that connects Stanley Kubrick, a teenage filmmaker's dreams, and decades of Hollywood history. The phrase, "See you next Wednesday," comes from the 1968 science fiction masterpiece 2001, A Space Odyssey, directed by Stanley Kubrick. In that film, astronaut Frank Poole receives a pre-recorded birthday message from his parents, and his father ends the transmission by saying, "See you next Wednesday." It's a throwaway line that lasts just a second, but it stuck with a 15-year-old John Landis who was completely obsessed with movies. Landis loved the phrase so much that he used it as the title for his very first screenplay, which he wrote as a teenager with dreams of becoming a filmmaker. That original screenplay was never produced, but Landis made a promise to himself. Whenever he used an idea, a gag, or even the smallest element from that early script in one of his professional films, he would give it credit by hiding the phrase somewhere in the movie. It became his personal signature, appearing in different forms across his filmography. In The Blues Brothers, it's on a billboard. In An American Werewolf in London, it's the title of a pornographic film playing in a seedy theater. In Trading Places, it appears on a movie poster in Jamie Lee Curtis's apartment. For Spies Like Us, Landis chose to place it on the recruiting poster, turning what could have been generic military propaganda into a hidden tribute to both Kubrick's film and his own youthful ambitions. The phrase appears for just a few seconds on screen, and most viewers have watched the movie dozens of times without ever noticing it, making it the perfect example of a director's personal touch that rewards the most observant fans. Fact 13. Vanessa Angel's film debut. When audiences first saw the striking Soviet rocket crew member zipping up her jumpsuit in the snowy Russian landscape of Spies Like Us, they were actually witnessing the very first film appearance of actress Vanessa Angel, who would go on to become a recognizable face in Hollywood comedies throughout the 1990s and early 2000s. The role was small but memorable, as Angel played one of the Russian missileers stationed at the remote Soviet launch site that Dan Aykroyd and Chevy Chase's bumbling characters stumble upon during their misadventures. Despite having minimal dialogue in the film, Angel made enough of an impression that critics Roger Ebert and Gene Siskel spent considerable time discussing her appearance in their review, with both legendary film critics seeming more interested in the curvaceous Soviet crew member than in the actual plot or performances of the lead actors. This attention to Angel's brief screen time, while somewhat objectifying by today's standards, certainly didn't hurt her nascent career. Born in London, England on July 20, 1957, Angel had worked as a model before landing this debut role, and the exposure from Spies Like Us helped launch her into a steady stream of television and film work. She went on to appear in the television series adaptation of Weird Science from 1994 to 1998, playing the beautiful genie Lisa opposite John Mallory Asher, and later had a supporting role in the 1996 Farrelly Brothers bowling comedy Kingpin starring Woody Harrelson and Randy Quaid. Her other notable work includes appearances in the cult classic television show Tales from the Crypt and a recurring role on the sitcom Stargate SG-1. The fact that such a small role in Spies Like Us served as the launching pad for a multi-decade career speaks to both Angel's screen presence and the visibility that even a John Landis comedy from the mid-'80s could provide to newcomers in Hollywood. Fact 14. McCartney's last top 10 hit for 29 years. When Paul McCartney recorded the theme song for Spies Like Us in September of 1985, nobody could have predicted it would mark the end of an era for one of music's biggest legends. The song peaked at number 7 on the Billboard Hot 100 in early 1986, giving McCartney what seemed like just another successful single in his incredible career. But that chart position would end up being far more significant than anyone realized at the time, because it became McCartney's last top 10 hit in the United States for an astonishing 29 years. McCartney recorded the entire song during a break from working on his Press to Play album, playing nearly every instrument himself except for the synthesizer parts, which were handled by Eddie Rayner from the band Split Enz. The track was created in just 1 week at his personal Hog Hill Mill studio after director John Landis called, asking for an up-tempo rock and roll song rather than the typical orchestral James Bond style theme McCartney had originally considered. The song reached number 13 in the United Kingdom and became a modest international success, but its real legacy would be defined by what didn't happen afterward. Throughout the late 1980s, the entire 1990s, and into the 2000s, McCartney continued releasing music and touring to massive crowds around the world, but none of his singles managed to crack the American top 10 again. It wasn't until 2015, nearly 3 decades later, that he finally returned to the top 10 with 4 5 Seconds, a collaboration with Rihanna and Kanye West that peaked at number 4. This meant that a song from a spy comedy that even its own director admitted disliking had accidentally become a significant milestone, representing McCartney's final solo chart triumph for nearly an entire generation. The song remains largely forgotten today compared to McCartney's classic hits, making its chart legacy even more surprising and unusual in the context of his legendary career. Fact 15. Family Guy's sequel. More than 2 decades after Spies Like Us hit theaters, the film received one of the strangest tributes in television history when Family Guy dedicated an entire episode to it in 2009. The episode, titled Spies Reminiscent of Us, brought back both Dan Aykroyd and Chevy Chase to play fictionalized versions of themselves, and the premise was absolutely wild. According to the Family Guy universe, President Ronald Reagan was so impressed after watching Spies Like Us that he actually appointed Aykroyd and Chase as real-life secret agents, turning their fictional roles into actual government positions. The episode wasn't just a quick reference or a throwaway joke either. It was a full 22-minute adventure that recreated numerous scenes from the original film and built an entire plot around the idea that these 2 comedians had been working as legitimate spies for the United States government ever since 1985. Both Aykroyd and Chase fully committed to the concept, appearing as guest stars and playing along with the absurd storyline that blurred the lines between their movie characters and their real identities. The Family Guy writers clearly had deep affection for the original film, packing the episode with specific callbacks and visual recreations that only true fans would recognize. What made this tribute even more unusual was the timing, coming at a point when Spies Like Us had largely faded from mainstream pop culture conversation despite its cult following. The episode introduced the film to a whole new generation of viewers who might never have heard of it otherwise, and it remains one of the most elaborate homages Family Guy has ever produced for a single movie. For Aykroyd and Chase, it represented a rare opportunity to revisit these characters in a completely unexpected context, proving that even failed spies can get a second chance at glory, even if it's in animated form on a completely different network 24 years later.